I mentioned earlier, my name is Russ Weninger. I'm a lawyer with the Weninger John law firm. My focus is on immigration law and on also on wills and estate planning. Before I get started, I would like to thank a few people. For starters, I'd like to thank the Calgary Catholic Immigration Society, CCIS, for giving me the idea to do this webinar series, and for initially promoting this webinar series as well. And I know that a lot of CCIS clients are tuning in to listen to this series. So thanks so much for that. Other organizations as well have had their their members or their client base tune into this webinar series. I know Bow Valley College students have been watching this webinar series, or at least some of them have been watching it. And I think other settlement agencies have some of their clientele watching as well, such as Immigrant Services Calgary, Center for Newcomers, and others too. So thanks so much for tuning in. I'm very appreciative to my viewers out there for making this series worthwhile by tuning in to watch it. I'd like to thank my student, my articling student, Sunny Liu, who is about halfway through articling, which means in about 6 months or so, she'll be a full-fledged lawyer. And Sunny's been doing a lot of the back-end work on this webinar series, and she's also been picking up some of the slack at the office while I've been focused on trying to produce content for this series. So a shout out to Sunny. And if you're one of my existing immigration clients, chances are you're getting a lot of help from Sunny. Sunny is basically the go-to person for many, if not most, of my immigration clients at the moment. So thank you very much, Sunny, for helping me. I should talk a little bit about myself, let you know a little bit about me. I'm an Alberta-based lawyer, a Calgary-based lawyer. I'm one of the co-founders of the Weninger John law firm. My favorite food in the world, actually, it's kind of a tie. Well, there's a top and then there's a close second. So my favorite food in the world is burgers. As far as I'm concerned, nothing beats a good burger. And I'm always on the lookout for a good burger. And do I have my favorites? Absolutely, I sure do. I'm a big fan of most of the fast food chains. Lately, I've had tremendous cravings for Carl's Jr. I don't know. There's something about those burgers. I just absolutely love them. Here in Calgary, there are a couple of local burger establishments that I really like. One is Boogie Burger, or Boogie's Burgers, which is very close to where I live. Actually, it's about a block away. So I'm very much looking forward to this pandemic being over, so I can just walk over to Boogie's Burger, sit down and enjoy a nice meal. So Boogie's is one of my go-to places for hamburgers in Calgary, and the other place that I really like that's a local Calgary burger place is Clive Burger, which is in the Beltline. My partner and I, we used to live in the Beltline, and we would frequently go there. It's definitely one of my favorite places. So big fan of burgers. a huge fan of sushi. That's my close second favorite food. My partner, she's Japanese, but even prior to meeting her, I just absolutely adored sushi. And so I'm looking forward when this is all done to my next trip to Japan, and I'm going to certainly be pigging out on all the sushi I can get my hands on. What else about me? Something a lot of people don't know. I'm becoming a huge fan of Korean dramas. So if you're like, most people out there, you're kind of stuck inside, or at least when you're not working, you're kind of just at home with little else to do. You can go for a walk, but you can't go hang out with your friends. You can't go, play some competitive sport or anything like that because you're just, stuck in your home. And so everyone's watching Netflix or, some streaming service, and almost everyone's binging on TV right now. And so what I've been watching lately has been Korean dramas. And one that I really enjoyed recently was Crash Landing on You on Netflix. So if you get a chance to watch Crash Landing on You, by the way, it's got English subtitles, but it's a really good drama, and the premise is that there's this rich woman from South Korea who has I guess a paragliding accident and gets blown into North Korea, and then she ends up being saved by a North Korean soldier, and it's kind of a romantic comedy. So definitely check out Crash Landing on You. I think you'll enjoy it, and it's got a good blend of kind of romantic comedy and action adventure, and yeah, and the acting's great, and so yeah, check that out if you get the chance. So enough about me and my food preferences and my TV preferences. Should start off with a little bit of housekeeping. I'm gonna try to answer questions throughout the presentation today. So if you have a burning question, feel free to ask it, and I might answer it right then on the spot if I see you coming through on the chat box, and I'll also answer questions at the end. So if you want to save it for the end, that's fine as well. I won't be talking about services or fees today. So I won't be trying to promote my firm or anything like that. This is not about me. Quite frankly, I don't care if I get any business out of this. What I want to do is help as many people as possible, as quickly, as cheaply, and efficiently as possible. And I think the way I'm going to do that is to be providing some free information for people who might benefit from it. So this is about that. This is not about me, trying to boost the profile of my firm or anything, or get clients. So we won't be discussing fees or anything like that, or services that my firm offers. The focus is going to be on you folks and what I can help you with through this sort of free content. I won't be talking about other areas of law. If you have a question about employment law or about government benefits or things like that, I mean, I've been answering some questions about government benefits, but I think I know who this person is. I think it might be what a client I've been helping. Actually, he put in the chat box, he put, go to Osaka. I've been to Osaka in Japan just once, actually, just for a few hours, but I had a blast there, and I can't wait to go back. If you do go to Osaka, They have Universal Studios there, and we saw this really cool Universal Studios performance. Basically, it was a live action thing involving singing and dancing and martial arts, and it was this story set in medieval Japanese times involving samurai and princesses and stuff like that, and it was done right outside of Osaka Castle, and they had this really cool light show where it looked like it was at night, but the way they did it, it was as if the castle was on fire in the background. It was incredible. The food in Osaka is absolutely amazing. It's incredible. And Osaka is close to other great places too. It's close to Kyoto. It's close to Kobe. It's close to Nara. Some other time I'll tell you guys about the time I got attacked by a bunch of unruly deer. They've got these small miniature deer that they consider sacred in the city of Nara, and some other time I'll tell you about how I got attacked by a bunch of deer in Nara. But yeah, Osaka, highly recommended. It's a really cool place if you get a chance to go to Japan. Okay, got sidetracked there. Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about other areas of law. I'm not going to talk about landlord-tenant law or anything like that, because for one thing, it's not kind of the area that I focus on in my practice, but also I want this to just be about immigration law. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to put this presentation up on YouTube afterwards. So if you missed this webinar but want to watch it later, it'll be up there. And if you know someone who may benefit from it, feel free to refer them. So today what I want to do is I'll give you a few updates on what's happening in immigration right now. Then I'm going to get into what you should be including in your application. And now you may be wondering why am I doing a webinar series or sorry, a webinar in the series on this particular topic, because the applications all have checklists, so it should be obvious what you should include in your application, but it's not obvious. Sometimes there are extra things that you should be including in your application that people might not be aware of. So I'm going to be focusing on that today with COVID-19 in mind. So especially now, there are certain things that maybe you should be adding to your application. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And it really doesn't matter what type of application you're submitting, whether it's a permanent residence application, a temporary residence application, work permit, study permit, maybe visitor extension. Given the pandemic and given the current situation, there are some things maybe you should be including now. And also there are certain things like cover letters that sometimes people don't include in applications, and it's almost always a good idea to include those. So I'm going to be, going over, some things that should be included, but people oftentimes aren't aware that they should be including, or just fail to include. At the end, I'll suggest a few resources that might be helpful for some people right now, and then I'll get to some more questions at the end too. At this point, I don't have a lot of people sending in questions, so maybe after hearing the presentation that'll stimulate some discussion. But if not, maybe we'll end a little bit early today. Okay, so updates. One update is that some people have been wondering about things like express entry, whether whether you could continue to submit applications under Express Entry or create a profile under Express Entry, whether the government was still drawing applicants under Express Entry. And the answer is yes. Yeah, you can still immigrate under Express Entry. The government has signaled that they do want immigration to go forward during the pandemic, that they still need immigrants, that they still need workers to some degree, and that that Canada depends on immigrants, that the economy depends on immigrants. So yeah, Express Entry is going ahead. And you may have noticed, so there was a recent draw, and I think the draw was actually at some low level, like 452. And if you've created a profile in Express Entry, maybe you're thinking, well, 452 isn't that low. And you're right, actually, it takes quite a bit to get a score of 452 under Express Entry. But recently, the point draws have been higher. They've been in the 460s and 470s and things like that. So so the fact that it's down to 452 is a promising sign. I think what the government's trying to do is to approve people who have Canadian work experience who are already in Canada and who don't need to, for example, get on a plane and fly to Canada. Because the airlines are virtually shut down at the moment. It's very tough to get a flight to Canada. Even if you've got a visa, even if you've been approved for permanent residence, it's difficult to actually get here. So the government still has these slots available under Express Entry, and I think what they're doing is focusing on people in Canada with Canadian experience. So a recent draw in the Canadian experience class had the points as low as 452. So if you are someone who might qualify under the Canadian experience class, which requires a person to have fairly decent English language proficiency or French language proficiency, as far as that goes, and it requires the person to have skilled work experience in Canada for at least 1 year within the last 3 years, full-time work experience for 1 year, or it can be part-time over 2 or 3 years even. It's 1,560 hours or 80 hours or something like that. I can't remember. It works out to essentially 30 hours a week for a year. But if you have that level of skilled work experience over at least a 12-month period of time, you might be a good candidate for the Canadian experience class. And if you have points in the mid 400 range, you've got a reasonable shot of receiving an invitation to apply under Express Entry right now. So for some people whose points are kind of in the mid 400 range, but they're not in the high 400 range, let's say, they're not in the 480s or anything like that. They're kind of around the 450, 460 range. Now might be the best time to actually be in the Express Entry pool if you're currently in Canada and if you're someone who qualifies under the Canadian experience class. So consider Express Entry. That's one thing I want to mention. In a past webinar, I've talked a little bit about spouses coming to Canada and how the government announced that the travel ban doesn't apply to the immediate family members of Canadians. However, the devil's in the details, and in fact, it appears as if the travel ban is preventing a lot of immediate family members of Canadians from actually entering Canada. There's a Toronto Star reporter. His name is Nicholas Keung. Keung, I believe, is the pronunciation for the last name, but I might be wrong about that. Keung. Anyways, he did a story recently on an article on how difficult it was for foreign spouses of Canadians to actually come to Canada. And in many cases, they're getting all the way to Canada, but they're being turned around at the border or at the airport. And Canada Border Services is taking the position that if you're just coming here temporarily, if you're just coming here to kind of, wait out the pandemic and then you're going to leave, then you're not supposed to be here. That foreign national family members of Canadian citizens are only meant to be coming to Canada if they're relocating here, basically. So if they're coming here permanently. Part of the problem then is that it creates a little bit of tension, because when you come to Canada and you don't yet have permanent residence, you typically have to convince a Canada Border Services officer upon attempting to enter Canada that that you're going to leave at the end of your stay, that your intention is only to reside here temporarily. Now, Canadian immigration law does recognize something called dual intent. So if you're someone who doesn't yet have permanent resident status in Canada, but you're looking to acquire permanent residence, you can indicate that intention when you're entering Canada. If Canada Border Services asks you how long you plan to stay in Canada, you can indicate to them that you're here temporarily, but your ultimate goal is to stay here permanently, and that you're taking steps to acquire permanent residence. So that dual intention, the plan to stay here temporarily, but with the goal of acquiring permanent residence, that's something that's recognized as legitimate under Canadian immigration law. So for those spouses who are coming to Canada, maybe there's not yet a spousal sponsorship application in the works. Even if they're trying to enter Canada, I think they should be indicating to Canada Border Services officers that they have a dual intention, that they will be coming here temporarily, because at the moment they can only have temporary status when entering Canada, but they're going to be taking steps to acquire permanent residence, and that is in fact their end goal, is to remain in Canada and make a life for themselves and their families here in Canada. But yeah, anecdotally and according to this article, it's been quite common for spouses to face barriers to entry when they've been attempting to come to Canada lately. So keep that in mind if that applies to you. Maybe you're a spouse of a Canadian, or you're a Canadian with a foreign national spouse. You're going to have to try to demonstrate to Canada Border Services when let's say you're the spouse and you're coming here, that you are planning on staying here permanently. And so you're probably going to have to chat about the permanent residence application that you're looking at submitting down the road. You're probably going to have to indicate to them that that you have a period of only 6 months of authorized temporary stay in Canada, and that during that 6 months time, that 6-month period of time, you're going to take steps to acquire permanent residence. You're probably going to have to indicate to them where you're going to be staying in Canada, what arrangements have been made for your accommodation, what your Canadian spouse or common law partner is going to be doing in Canada, whether they've got a job, for example. Those sorts of things will help establish that the intention is to come here permanently, and to make a life here permanently, even though the initial stay is technically temporary. I hope that makes sense. Maybe that's more confusing than helpful, um, but yeah, there's this interesting tension at the moment, with, on the one hand, someone who's not a permanent resident only being allowed to come to Canada temporarily, but then the requirement being that for these immediate family members, it has to be essential travel. So that implies relocation to Canada on a permanent basis. So I think this tension can perhaps be resolved by this notion of dual intent under Canadian immigration law. So keep that in mind, and maybe even use that expression dual intent when you're talking to Canada Border Services officers. Other things to note, it looks like CELPIP might be allowing people who want to take English proficiency exams to start taking them sometime in the near future. IELTS might be doing that as well. And in Alberta, the Alberta government is talking about, I think it's around mid-May, May 14th, if I believe. Some restaurants and businesses and places like that were closed are now going to be open again, but with some restrictions. So it may well be the case that people who weren't able to apply for permanent residence because they couldn't get the CELPIP done or the IELTS done, that might resolve itself, hopefully sometime within the next couple of months or so. But that being said, you're going to want to keep an eye on the availability of CELPIP or IELTS test dates, because if you're someone who needs to apply for permanent residence fairly quickly, you might be in the same boat as a lot of people, and so there might be a rush to get into those exam slots. So you might want to follow closely the availability of those the exam dates. Yeah, so I think that's enough for updates for this week. One other important update that applies to a lot of people, actually. Apparently, the Alberta government recently announced that it would extend Alberta healthcare coverage to people who have implied status. So if you're a foreign worker who has applied for a new work permit prior to your old work permit expiring, and you don't yet have the new work permit, but you're waiting for that application to be processed, then you'd have what's called implied status. And unfortunately, in most cases, there's no paperwork showing that you have implied status. There's just, the fact that you've submitted an application and you have this expired work permit, and you're waiting for your new work permit. So implied status is kind of tricky, and oftentimes people who are on implied status, they have things happen, like they have their driver's license expire, they have their Alberta health coverage expire, and especially during a pandemic, this can be a huge problem for workers, people who are currently in Alberta and might be contracting COVID-19 down the road. And what do you do if you're going to have to pay $10,000 per hospital visit, sort of thing. Well, yeah, the government has announced it's going to be extending Alberta health coverage to those foreign workers who are currently on implied status. Now, the devil will be in the details. It's not yet clear necessarily what the requirements are going to be, what the catch is, what kind of information you'll have to provide to prove that you're on implied status. But at least that's it's a step in the right direction on the part of the Alberta government to extend healthcare coverage to people who have previously not been eligible for Alberta health coverage. So Louise just indicated in the chat box, I did medical a week ago in Edmonton, and I got my confirmation for permanent residence in the mail. Now I have to send a picture and sign form services, send a picture and sign a form. Services are opening now. Okay, that's awesome. That's incredible. That's a very good sign. And yeah, I've had IRCC follow up with some of my clients, and recently, and some of my clients have received confirmation of permanent residence recently. So yeah, things are still going ahead. It might appear that everything is shut down, but the government is still approving applications, and people are still successfully immigrating to Canada during the pandemic. So that's great. Let's talk about what to include in an application. Now, it should be a given that you should be including everything that's asked for in the guide or in the checklist for the application. So, for example, if they ask for a copy of your passport, you provide a copy of your passport. If they ask for something like an educational credential assessment, you provide that. If they ask for a copy of your diploma, you provide that. If they ask for a copy of your birth certificate, you provide that. That's obvious. Anything they ask for, you should be providing. Now, so what happens if they ask for something that you can't provide? What do you do then? What happens if they ask for an immigration medical exam and you can't get that done because there's no office available to do immigration medicals where you happen to be living? Maybe you're living overseas in a country where most medical offices are shut down, for example. Well, for some things like medicals and for biometrics and things like that, the government has recognized that there may be delays, and so the government is routinely granting extensions for those sorts of things. If you're mid-application, you can typically reach out to IRCC, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. You can reach out to them through the web form, and you can indicate that you have been trying to provide that requested item, but for whatever reason, you've been unable to do so, and you should go into detail about what that reason is, and you should try to corroborate the fact that you're unable to get that item, and mention steps you've taken to try to obtain that item. So, for example, if it was a police check, you might, that you weren't able to get, you might try to provide evidence that, from the police website and wherever you happen to be needing that police certificate from, you might want to provide evidence that from their website that they're not processing those requests, for example. Um, so anything you can't provide that you've been asked to provide, you should be explaining that and explaining the steps you've been taking to try to get that item. Uh, and you should also be um, providing whatever corroboration you can that practically speaking, it's impossible at the moment to get that item. Hal, I think it is, wrote, "Can I apply for AIMP if I'm having a job offer and language test, uh, NCLC 6 from outside Canada or the CLB?" Okay. Not entirely sure what a language benchmark. Okay, okay. So you have a language benchmark of 6, a job offer from outside of Canada. Okay, so Hal, if you're currently outside of Canada, uh, I don't think AIMP is going to work for you. You have to be currently resident in Canada in order to receive a nomination under the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program. So you have to currently be living here and working here in order to qualify for a nomination under AIMP. Uh, AIMP recently added a notice on their website indicating that they were going to um, be following up with people and in some cases providing extensions for people or postponing applications um, while people waited to resume employment and things like that. So maybe if a person is temporarily stuck outside of Canada, but they're planning on coming back, they've got a valid work permit and they're ready to hit the ground running and start working as soon as they can get back into Canada. Maybe AIMP will delay processing a little bit to allow them to get back here, um, but they won't be issuing nominations, I don't think. At least that's based on past experience with AIMP. I don't think they'll be issuing a nomination to anyone who's currently outside of Alberta and is not currently working in Alberta. Um, now, in terms of the language benchmark, CLB of 6, if I'm understanding correctly, um, yeah, that should be good for AIMP. So if you have that level of language ability, that in English, for example, that should be sufficient for AIMP. But it sounds like in this case, maybe the problem is getting to Canada, and getting to Alberta in particular. YouTube viewer wrote, "I need a year of foreign work experience to boost my current points 444 up. Is this judged on the exact hours worked or the length of time you spent working?" Um, yeah, it's judged on both actually. So you have to put in the equivalent of full-time hours in a year, but you also have to work a year. So it's not just like you can work, let's say, 70 or 80 hours a week for 6 months and then have that count as a year of employment. You need an actual year of employment, so 12 months. So if you're working 80 hours a week and you do that over a full year, you won't get 2 years worth of credit. You'll just get a year, if that makes sense. But YouTube viewer, I should mention, if you qualify under the Canadian Experience class, who knows, you might get lucky. That 444 points might be enough to get you an invitation to apply at some point in the near future, if you qualify under the Canadian Experience class. Veronica wrote, "Hi, I have a question about my postgraduate work permit. I took a gap year in 2017, and since then, they have changed the rules for postgraduate work permit, now allowing gaps. Um, based on your experience, do you think I still have a chance to get postgraduate work permit if I explain my situation? Um, I think a lot would depend on your particular circumstances, Veronica. So if you're currently applying for your first postgraduate work permit, and you currently meet the eligibility requirements, so you're within 6 months of approximately 6 months of having graduated uh, from your program, then it might be worth looking into. Um, yeah. Yeah. Oh, so you clarified that you said they're not allowing gaps. I think it depends on the circumstances. So if you took a gap, for some reason to, there's a medical justification for it, or I think an officer maybe does have discretion to allow for a certain period of time away from studies. Um, so uh, I, I'd have to look into your situation a little more to give you a kind of a definitive answer. But on the face of it, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of qualifying for a postgraduate work permit. It might be something worth looking into. The other thing I should mention is sometimes, and maybe this isn't a very satisfying response, but sometimes people might uh, technically not meet the requirements for something, but um, if they're close to meeting the requirements, if you submit an application and you're convincing enough, and maybe you catch a visa officer who's or an immigration officer who is willing to be a little forgiving about certain defects. In some cases, a person might get approved for something that technically they don't meet the requirements for. So I'm not suggesting that people should send out a bunch of incomplete or garbage applications, but there are some circumstances where someone is very close to meeting the requirements, and there's just some maybe it's a particular document they need that they can't get, but otherwise they meet the requirements, or um, they yeah, if it's a very minor thing, it may in fact be worth your while to submit the application anyways, and just keep your fingers crossed and hope for the best, and maybe try to explain the defect in the application and ask for a special exemption, discretionary exemption from meeting that requirement. Hopefully, if the officer has had their coffee that morning and they're in a good mood, and they're, you know, who knows? Sometimes people can get lucky, and so in some cases it's a calculated risk, and if you're willing to, you know, risk losing the application fee, by submitting an application that has some minor problem with it, yeah, it may be worth applying anyways. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. One important thing to include in almost any type of application is a cover letter. So what a cover letter does, it does a few things. One thing it does is it explains ambiguities in an application. So sometimes, for example, and this might not seem like it should be something that's ambiguous, but I've had clients in the past who've had kind of complicated marital histories. They've been in a relationship with someone where they don't know whether or not it's quite a common law relationship, for example. I've even sometimes had people apply, and they're not sure if they're still legally married to someone. I know that's kind of hard to believe, but believe it or not, sometimes people have that doubt about whether they're still legally married to an estranged spouse. Um, so when you submit an immigration application, you risk uh, having your application rejected, and you actually risk uh, being found inadmissible, or yeah, inadmissible to Canada, um, for a period of 5 years, if you misrepresented something. So, and misrepresentation under Canadian immigration law is um, uh, basically inaccurate information. Period. Um, so, if you provide inaccurate information on your application, that uh, could potentially uh, cause a problem with the processing of the application, could potentially mislead uh, an immigration officer. It doesn't really matter what your intention is. Now, there are some exceptions. There's some case law that says if a person made an honest mistake in the inaccurate information they provided, that maybe they're okay then, in some limited circumstances. But usually, the onus is on you to be providing accurate information, and um, not understanding the language, or not being familiar with the forms, or not having an immigration lawyer help you, or things like that. Those aren't considered to be excuses by IRCC. Um, so you always want to avoid finding a misrepresentation, and usually the best strategy there is, if you're uncertain about an answer you're providing in an application, and oftentimes the forms are just check boxes, or um, they've got a drop down menu list, and you have to choose one or the other. And you choose one option, but you're not 100% satisfied with that choice. Uh, the cover letter is the place where you can address some of those ambiguities with your application, and maybe explain the circumstances. And at the very least, you won't be found to have misrepresented on your application if you explain things in the cover letter. I'm going to take a question from Aaron. So Aaron put, can I apply for my postgraduate work permit together with my husband's open work permit, even if I still don't have skilled work? So Aaron, you could apply for a postgraduate work permit, but I think your husband's open work permit is going to require you to have skilled employment. That's my understanding, anyways, unless they've recently changed the criteria for that. Okay, Aaron, it's a different Aaron, actually. If I am unable to find a skilled job due to COVID-19 unemployment and laid off, can I apply for my spouse's open work permit together with postgraduate work permit? Oh, maybe it is the same Aaron. Maybe it's just Aaron with a different account asking the same question. Or maybe it's a different Aaron. No, yeah, if you currently don't have a job due to COVID-19, uh, even if you're ordinarily a skilled worker, and even if you have some type of work permit that allows you to work in Canada, if you're not currently employed in Canada in a skilled occupation, don't think your spouse is going to qualify for an open work permit. At least not based on the normal rules. It might be possible that your spouse will qualify for some other type of work permit, or might qualify for a temporary resident permit, which could possibly lead to a work permit as well. So your spouse might qualify for other things, but they won't necessarily meet the requirements, or in fact, my understanding is they won't meet the requirements at all for a spousal open work permit if the postgraduate work permit holder currently doesn't have skilled employment. Okay, so we were talking about cover letters earlier. So yeah, cover letters can be used to explain away ambiguity. A good use of a cover letter is to kind of summarize the requirements of the application, to show that you satisfied the requirements for getting the work permit or the study permit or permanent residence or whatever. So cover letters useful that way. Any special requests or consideration can also go in the cover letter. So if you're asking for humanitarian relief, that can go in a cover letter. If you have some legitimate reason why your application should be processed urgently, you can make that request in your cover letter. The officer may not grant that request. They may, just kind of disregard that plea for special consideration or that special request. But if you don't ask, you won't get it. So in some cases, it might be worth asking for certain things. I always like to list off everything I've included in an application as well. In the cover letter, there is a document checklist that goes along with most applications, but I recommend, and that's something you have to include with your application as well. So you have to include the document checklist, but don't just rely on the document checklist, because the document checklist isn't necessarily reflective of everything you've submitted with your application. Sometimes you have to go above and beyond and provide extra documents and extra corroborating evidence. And so I think it's a very good idea to put all of that in the cover letter. So list off every single thing you're providing with your application, every document, every immigration form, everything. So we've talked about cover letters, why it's important. Now, when you're applying for something, it's possible you might not meet all the requirements for what you're applying for, and you might be seeking, a special, quote unquote, humanitarian exemption from some of the requirements. If that's the case, then there's some other evidence, some other information that you should be providing along with your application. So, for example, right now with this pandemic happening, it might be a good idea to provide some sort of credible evidence about what's happening in your home country with COVID-19. What's the situation there? What's the current economic situation in your home country? And then it's always a good idea to talk about what special hardships you might face if you're making some sort of request for some type of humanitarian or discretionary relief. Sometimes I see requests for special consideration, and actually, sometimes this comes in the form of a letter or an email a client will send to me, or a prospective client. They want me to represent them, for example, and so they'll send me an email, and sometimes it's long and rambling and talks about every hardship they've ever faced in their life, and it talks about when they were 10 years old and their dog got run over, and it tells me how I'm a good, wonderful person, and it begs me to take on their case, and the letter probably says "God bless you" about 20 times. So I get that from time to time, and I know immigration officers get that all the time. And I don't think that's effective. I think that type of kind of needy, um, uh, sort of, I don't know, emotionally charged, um, desperate type of correspondence, I don't think that's effective at all. So my recommendation is, even if you're requesting humanitarian relief, keep it professional and keep it dignified. So don't beg and plead. Don't beat around the bush. So and sometimes this is a cultural thing. So sometimes people from, especially certain countries, they're told that it's, or kind of, maybe they pick it up kind of, just through observation of how others in their culture communicate. But in some cultures, you don't get to the point right away. You kind of skirt around the issue, and you kind of imply the issue, or maybe you have a lot of small talk and then eventually get to the issue. That's not a good strategy, usually, though, in an immigration application. So you want to use the North American method of communication. And the North American method of communication is typically to get straight to the point, to not beat around the bush, to say immediately what it is that you want. And so yeah, don't have 5 pages of background about your life story, followed by a 1-sentence request at the end for what you're seeking. Let them know right up front what it is you want them to do for you, and why they should do that. Yeah, and I don't think letters requesting humanitarian consideration should say things like "God bless you" and stuff like that. I mean, it's one thing to get that after the fact. Someone approved your application, and send them a thank you note. It probably won't end up going to the right person anyways, but that's a little bit different. But if you um, if you're saying that the person's a wonderful person and may God bless them and whatnot, when you're asking them to do a specific thing, I think it's almost, when I see that, when clients do that to me, when they're begging me to take on their case, for example, uh, it's almost compassion fatigue. You go, oh, it's this needy, desperate person, and they're trying to, they think maybe I'm religious, and they want to play off of my religiosity and take advantage of that. And I'm not religious. I'm not particularly religious, but even if I were a religious person, I think I'd resent that. If and you might think it's being nice and polite, and maybe that's the way people address each other in a particular culture, but I don't think it's appropriate for an application that's being submitted to an immigration officer. So I'd recommend leaving God out of it. Don't bless them. Don't say that you're praying for them. Anything like that. I don't think that really helps matters. Yeah, so don't beat around the bush. Don't bury the lead. Get straight to the point. Why you're seeking what you're seeking, and put your best foot forward right off the bat. Sometimes it's worth providing proof of your ongoing status in Canada. So especially if you're applying for an extension or some sort of relief, and you've been here for 5 years, and you've been working all that time and paying taxes and contributing to Canadian society, provide evidence of that. So show your old work permits, and provide copies of tax assessments, copies of your lease, employment reference letters, things like that, to show that you've been here a while, you've been paying taxes, you've been contributing to the Canadian economy, you're the money you've been making has been going back into Canadian society, and sometimes it's helpful to demonstrate that. It's also a good idea if you're seeking any type of humanitarian or special relief to provide information about any children who might be affected. So in terms of humanitarian or special discretionary relief, those are the sorts of things I'd include in an application. Maybe your application is just a normal work permit application. Maybe you're not seeking any special, exempt or special discretionary relief or humanitarian relief or anything like that. Or maybe it's just a normal express entry application. Nonetheless, I think it's not a bad idea to try to convince whoever's reviewing your application that you're a cool person, that you're a superstar, that you go above and beyond the requirements, and that you're someone who would make a real contribution to Canadian society. So, for example, it might not be a bad idea to provide a copy of your resume, the actual resume you use to apply for jobs. Now, one thing you want to make sure is that your resume is actually consistent with the work history that you list in your application. Because if you're listing jobs in your resume that you're not listing in your work history, or vice versa, then that might raise some red flags with the immigration officer. But yeah, in general, I think it's not a bad idea to provide a resume as kind of further information about your background and your work experience. And with a resume, you can sometimes go into a little bit more detail about your particular experience and the skills you've developed and the type of job duties you had. So I think sometimes providing a resume can be beneficial. And letters from current or former employers, both in Canada and overseas. I think it's a good idea to provide old employer reference letters and current employer reference letters. That's usually tremendously helpful. Because again, it corroborates your work experience. It shows that you're a hardworking person who has something to add to Canadian society. Proof of money spent in Canada is maybe helpful for certain types of applications. So, proof that you've purchased property here, or that you've purchased a car here, or that you're leasing an apartment, or that you've invested in certain things in Canada, or that you've got money in a Canadian bank account. That sort of information is sometimes helpful as well in an application. One thing any immigration officer wants to be certain of is that you will not be a drain on society, that you will not be reliant on social assistance and other forms of social services, or not overly reliant, I should say. And that you'll be self-supporting once you're approved for permanent residence. That's usually, there are some exceptions to that. So sometimes people will qualify for permanent residence under humanitarian and compassionate grounds, and maybe they're not self-sufficient. Maybe they're reliant on the government for social assistance and stuff like that. But under the economic categories for permanent residence, so for example, anything under express entry, anything under a provincial nominee program, they want people coming here who are going to be economically self-sufficient. So sometimes it's helpful to kind of demonstrate that as well. Maybe you've won some awards in the work you've done, or in your studies, or whatever, and sometimes that's worth highlighting in an application. Yeah, in general, information about property ownership or your financial health, assuming you do own property or you do have healthy finances, providing that sort of information can sometimes be worthwhile in either a work permit application or in a permanent residence application. And some information that corroborates the fact that you have business acumen. So let's say you're applying under a significant benefit work permit. You want to set up a business in Canada, and you're going to employ Canadians, and you're going to maybe purchase some commercial real estate, and you're going to do things to stimulate the Canadian economy. If you're applying for something like that, it's probably helpful to show evidence of success in past business ventures, and that might be from listing companies you've previously established, or providing proof of your net worth, or the fact that you've set up different companies, or that you're a shareholder in different companies. So if any of that applies to you and it's related to the application you're submitting, it might be worth providing that sort of evidence of your past business involvement and your business acumen. Likewise, if you have a particular um, uh, level of education related to business, or you've taken certain courses in business, sometimes it's helpful to provide evidence of that as well, especially if you're doing something like a significant benefit work permit application based on starting up a business, or if you're applying under an LMI, owner operator LMIA, uh, you know, stream for a work permit. Uh, yeah, demonstration of business experience and business acumen is probably very helpful. So, yeah, that's basically all I wanted to talk about today. I don't know if there are any other questions. Doesn't look like it looks like there are about 12 people online at the moment. Does anyone still have a question at this point? Um, oh, I should mention a few resources. So, one thing I'd encourage people to check out, if they haven't already done so, um, if they've currently got an AIMP application in the works, or they're thinking of uh, you know doing an AIMP application, I'd recommend that they check out the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program website, and look at the notice there on the website about COVID-19, uh, and how the Alberta government is uh, dealing with applications submitted or being processed during the pandemic. So that's one thing I'd refer people to if they're thinking about applying under AIMP. Um, or if they have already applied under AIMP, check out the update to the website that was put on there quite recently. Um, if you're thinking about maybe applying under Express Entry, maybe it hasn't even occurred to you that you might be eligible to apply under Express Entry, but I'd strongly recommend checking out Express Entry and check out their comprehend, uh, and look at the page that deals with Express Entry applications, um, and look at the criteria. Look at whether or not you might qualify under Canadian Experience class, uh, and use the comprehensive ranking system tool to kind of guesstimate your points, and see whether you might be in the mid 400 range for points. So yeah, those are a couple of resources I'd recommend checking out this week. Another thing, it's not really related to immigration, but it's related to health and safety. Um, the Alberta government recently released an app for tracking COVID-19. So, and the app uses Bluetooth. So what happens is you download the app and you keep your phone with you when you're going out in public. And if you come within a couple of meters of, I think it's 2 meters of someone, and they have the app, and they later test positive for COVID-19, or you later test positive for COVID-19, that information will then be shared. You won't know who it was who you came in contact with, but you'll know that you were possibly exposed to COVID-19. So that's an app that's out there. It's a free app. It's developed by the government of Alberta. I think it's based on. I was reading a couple of news articles. It's based on open source code from the app in Singapore that was developed, and I think it's worthwhile for workers to have this type of technology at their disposal, because it's oftentimes people in service industries and hospitality and restaurants and in retail. Those are people who are kind of on the front line in terms of this pandemic. Those are people who might be exposed. So if you're working in any of those occupations, and oftentimes it is immigrant, or foreign workers, university and college students, people like that, who are oftentimes working in those types of occupations. Having that sort of contract tracing app could be beneficial, maybe. So I'd recommend checking it out. Apparently, those sorts of apps are only really useful if a lot of people download them and use them. So now I understand the app has it's a little bit buggy in some respects. If you have an iOS device, I think you have to keep your device unlocked so that the app will work properly, although they're looking to fix that bug. But I think on the whole, it's probably sensible, not only for your personal safety, but for the safety of others. I think it's a good idea for people to be downloading and using that app. So that's a resource I'd recommend people checking out. Okay. So the one Aaron said, "Thank you for answering our query." Aaron, it's Erlin. I even read it wrong. So there's Aaron and Erlin. So Erlin, Malara, and I are sisters. Okay. Thank you, Aaron, for the clarification. And sorry, Erlin, for earlier mispronouncing your name. My eyesight isn't what it once was, and reading off of the computer screen is not always easy for me. So sorry about that. Before I go, I'd like to once again thank everyone for tuning in and watching this webinar. I'd like to thank CCIS and all other organizations out there that are referring their clients to this webinar series. And I'd like to thank, once again, my student, Sunny Liu, who has been helping me with this series and has been kind of taking a lot of the load off my shoulders in terms of, work on client files so that I can, in fact, focus more on this webinar series. So thank you very much, Sunny. In the future, I plan on doing a lot of more of these webinars on various topics, and I greatly appreciate any feedback that viewers might want to provide about content, about how they want this material presented to them. Um, and as I mentioned last week, I'm thinking about doing some courses, maybe something on, how to do a humanitarian and compassionate grounds application, something along those lines. And I was thinking of putting them up on YouTube as free courses, and it would walk a person through, a typical application, let's say from start to finish. So if you think something like that might be beneficial, please let me know. Please put it in the comments section, let's say of this video or of another immigration related video on my YouTube channel. Uh, Please reach out to me with any questions you may have, and I may answer those questions on the next webinar. And let me know, yeah, in general, what type of information might be helpful to you, because I would, I'm doing this for you. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not expected to get any material gain out of this. And I quite frankly don't care. I just want to be helping as many people as I possibly can at the moment. And so let me know what I can do to help you, and I'll try my best through this webinar series and through the YouTube channel to provide content that's helpful to you. Well, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next week. Bye for now.